How do you do, fellas, and welcome back to another historical alternate prediction of the US presidential election. Today we have went back to 1968 in the historic election between Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey and George Wallace. Now it is one of the most tense elections in American history because of the Vietnam War, the massive unrests following the death of Martin Luther King and the death of Robert Kennedy. So in this scenario, I am going to consider the possibility of a Richard Nixon landslide. Now, what would be required for a Nixon landslide? And that is an even bigger split in the Democratic vote than what we saw. In the end, it was not really a big split. The popular vote was almost evenly divided between the top two finishers, with Wallace far behind. But in much of the autumn, in much of the campaign, it was looking like Nixon would have a quite easy win, and it looked like Humphrey's campaign had crashed and burned before it had started. But a few things happened. So for Nixon to be able to win in a landslide election, well, the map is going to look a bit differently, but to be short, the Wallace campaign will steal more Democratic votes from Humphrey. That is where it begins. And it starts in the state of Texas. Nixon would take the state of Texas. It was a state that Humphrey won quite narrowly, and much thanks to the popularity of, I wouldn't say popularity of Johnson, but it was the home state of the current president, Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson. So Texas would easily go to Nixon if things went differently. Now, to be clear, there are a few requirements. In this scenario, the popular vote percentage taken by the Nixon campaign is going to be about the same, but Wallace takes a lot more from Humphrey, and it includes that he does not pick Curtis LeMay as his running mate, because that was actually something that ruined much of his campaign and gave Humphrey a lot of momentum and a lot of his voters back. But two very important narrow states that Richard Nixon would win in this scenario is Michigan there, going red, and Pennsylvania. Because if you look at this area here, they were both quite narrow. Michigan wasn't that narrow, but it would still go to Nixon in this scenario, and as well would the state of Washington. It would be a quite easy Nixon state, and the state of Maryland. But in this scenario, Richard Nixon would also lose a few states. You do know that it takes into account that Wallace runs a stronger campaign. So Richard Nixon loses the state of Tennessee to George Wallace. He loses South Carolina, and he loses the state of Florida, which was not the same urban state or suburban state as it is today. It was a bit more Dixie dominated because air conditioning was just a much newer invention back then. And there are other states that were quite contested as well. So I do believe that he would, let's try to be accurate in this prediction here. Yeah, I think that still Nixon will be able to hang on to the state of Virginia quite reliably, Republican at this point, but Wallace would take all of the state of North Carolina, and beyond this point, most states are quite reliably for Richard Nixon. Now, in West Virginia, I think it would just take more for Humphrey to lose there. Okay, so it's a state that he won by about 8 points. Quick math, heavily Democratic stronghold, racial causes and segregation not as big of an issue in West Virginia. I think he would have held on to the state of West Virginia. Minnesota is a state that I also believe that he would win because of the home state factor, and if you look at the way he won Minnesota, it was by 12.5 points, so I don't think that Wallace wasn't doing any good in that state anyway. But there are few others. that I believe he would win, Mr. Nixon. And surprisingly, Maine is not one of them. Maine has been a very Republican state, but there are two more states that I believe Nixon would win, and one of them is the state of New York. I don't know why, but New York is actually described as Nixon's home state, even though I would insist that that is California, because California is where he was a senator from, a congressman from. But, well, if they say it's New York, then I guess it is. And Connecticut. And that is the last state I believe would have gone to Mr. Nixon, and that would actually have put him at more than 400 electoral votes. And approximately 35 states. So not the type of landslide that we saw in 1972 or 1980 or 84 or 88, but still a quite solid landslide victory for Nixon. And even though the popular vote here is Humphrey is definitely number 2 in the popular vote, but Wallace still has more electoral votes because of the disparity of his vote. Majority of them, vast majority being in the South, Hubert Humphrey being a bit more spread out. If you are looking for more explanations on that, you should look at the 1948 election, where Wallace and Thurman got the same amount of votes, but Wallace did not win any states, but Thurman did because of the southern factor. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.